This is Good Morning Nigeria on the network service of the NTA. Before our conversation starts on solutions to farmers, herders, clashes in Nigeria, let's take this background report by Joseph Ozen.
With veterinary clinics, water points for animals, and facilities for herders and their families, including schooling, through these rehabilitated reserves, the federal government is making far-reaching and practical changes, allowing for different communities to coexist side by side, supporting farmers to till their fields, herders to rear their livestock, and Nigerians everywhere to be safe. These are words of President Muhammadu Buhari captured in a press statement issued by the Senior Special Assistant to the President on Media and Publicity, Garba Shehu, as he approves establishment of ranches and revival of forest reserves to curb frequent clashes between herders and farmers in parts of the country. These crises have continued to consume lives and displaced many, threatening food security of the country due to neglect of farmlands and destruction of crops. Many communities have also become hostile to the herders who they accuse of flooding their farmlands with cattle to eat up crops. Several engagements between stakeholders towards finding lasting solutions have not yielded much desired results as clashes continue to ravage communities. On the 21st of May 2021, the Southern Governors Forum met in Asaba, Delta State, and declared a ban on open grazing to improve security. The decision of the Southern Governors gives credence to earlier enacted Benue State Open Grazing Prohibition and Ranches Establishment Law 2017. Though some court rulings are giving backing to the decisions of some of the governors, the Attorney General of the Federation, Abubakar Malami, recently disagreed with the stand of the Southern Governors, stating it does not align with the provision of the Constitution, citing freedom of the citizen to live and operate in any part of the country. The approval given by President Muhammadu Buhari for the establishment of ranches and revival of forest reserves across the country tells how much the president is concerned over sustainable and lasting solutions to the herders-farmers crisis. The laws, programs, and recommendations have all been subjected to questions and criticism. What then is the solution to the herders-farmers crisis? This question and other related matters are what guests on Good Morning Nigeria are waiting to discuss soon.
Thank you very much, Joseph Olsen, for that backgrounder. With us in the Abuja studios now, I would like to welcome Dr. Saleh Momale, who is the technical advisor to the Minister of Agriculture and Rural Development. Dr. Momale, pleasure to have you this morning.
Thank you very much, and good morning, Nigerians.
And joining us from our Enugu Network Center is a regular guest on Good Morning Nigeria, Executive Secretary, Agricultural Research Council of Nigeria, Professor Hamisu Shaributu. Professor Shaributu, delighted to have you this morning.
And Kirian, good morning, Nigerians.
And from our Benin studio, we have a Professor of Wildlife Management, Professor Gideon Emelwe, Department of Forest Resources and Wildlife Management, Faculty of Agriculture, Science University of Benin. Sir, you're also welcome to the program.
Good morning, Nigerians.
All right, gentlemen, let's get to the heart of the matter with Dr. Saleh Momale. Dr. Momale, well, latest reports have indicated that there is a new game plan to ensure that the perennial clashes between farmers and herdsmen and the associated criminality are brought, those clashes and the associated criminality are brought to a halt. What is this new game plan?
Thank you very much, and good morning, Nigerians, once again. Like you rightly observe, and also in the background report, this has been an issue and a challenge that has been facing this country over the past decade, 3 decades or even more. And several approaches and many solutions have been proffered. However, the situation has escalated in the past 1.5 decades, due largely to the inability of local institutions to deal with some of the challenges, as well as the growing spate of insecurity generally in the country. Again, the growing narratives and occasional politicization of some of these issues have made its publicity widespread and has also raised embers that has not helped in resolving the crisis. Basically, what the federal government is up and doing now is to take a three-pronged approach. First, to engage with the relevant institutions, with the relevant stakeholders, and with the relevant communities. Open up dialogue and strengthen local institutions that will be able to handle effectively the issues of administration of resource governance in such a way that simple disputes, disagreements, and local conventions can be grown or can be developed to address some of these problems in the interim. At the second level is to prompt up actions at the federal level in collaboration with the state governments that will result to the rapid transformation in the livestock production system through the development and provision of requisite infrastructure, massive training and capacity development that will ultimately lead to the complete overhaul of the traditional system of livestock production, which is dependent on animals freely moving from one place to another in search of feeds and water. And this will be addressed by providing the needed capacity and infrastructure for the producers to produce the feeds that is needed for their livestock, while the government provides support in infrastructure such as water and skills, as well as financial services that will enable these producers to invest in the productive resources that will be able to provide the needed feeds and water that is required. At the third level is to prompt rapid private sector investments in this sector, and this will cover the critical areas of service delivery. For example, promoting the emergence of companies or firms that will be able to produce alternative feed resources for livestock, as we have seen in the poultry sector, which has driven the development of that sector. Again, we want to see the professionals, particularly in the veterinary services, prompting up private sector veterinary service delivery, and then vamping up what we call the extension service system in such a way that private extension services and more modern and robust extension service delivery mechanisms exploiting the current developments in technology are deployed also not only in the livestock sector but also other aspects of the agricultural sector. Again, we are rapidly promoting backward integration by organizing and supporting large-scale private sector investments, particularly in the dairy and beef sectors, to come into the country through direct foreign investments, as well as the indigenous or those existing multinational companies like Friesland Campino, like many of these companies that we have engaged in the dairy value chain to also make rapid and huge investments in the sector to promote, the backward integration across the entire value chain of both the beef and the dairy sectors. We do believe that the first approach of rapid engagements, working with traditional institutions, working with the stakeholders, the local government administrations, as well as the states, will douse many of the ongoing challenges that we do have at the moment in terms of the management of community resources that will be able to address the day-to-day grievances and challenges that exist. Because even if you want to stop, like the southern governors are saying, ban open grazing, it cannot take place over a day or over a month. The reason is because livestock have life. They are creatures that have life. They must feed, they must have water. So even if you ban grazing, it means those animals must be fed and they must have water to drink. And unless you have alternative mechanisms for feeding those live animals and giving them water, you cannot confine them because they will die. And these are natural creatures that we have a responsibility as humans to preserve them as creatures of God. So this is fundamental. So it's very difficult, it's a challenging issue, and it is something that we must take pragmatic actions and programs over time, scaling up each activity and then giving a time frame within which we will develop the mechanisms and alternative systems of feeding that will be able to take care of this. And this is why this three-pronged approach is being developed, and we are going to pursue its implementation vigorously in the forthcoming months, and subsequently leading to the implementation of the National Livestock Transformation Plan, which ultimately will lead to the sustainable transformation of the livestock production system, and then the development of viable ranches all over the country, particularly in those areas where the ranching system or where the climatic conditions are most favorable throughout, particularly many of the savanna, the Guinea savanna, the Sudan savanna, and the more southern parts of this country. Where we will have a challenge over time is mostly the few Sahelian parts of this country, which are drier and where the development of ranches will require huge capital investments in terms of getting access to water. So in these regions, we do know that most probably the traditional system may continue over a longer period of time, but we believe that once the savanna, the Sudan savanna, the Guinea savanna, and the southern, the forest zones of Nigeria are able to develop this system, it will ultimately provide the needed capital that will lead to the investment in the fewer Sahelian parts of this country, where also the complete transformation will ultimately take place over time.
All right, Dr. Momale, well spoken. But look, this is not the first time that this administration has mooted the idea of transforming the livestock sector. It's always been there. But what has happened in the past is that no proper engagement has been established. For instance, you said first engagement is to engage the local institutions. What are these institutions? You also talked about prompt of actions in collaboration with state governors, the development of infrastructure, and of course prompt rapid private sector investment and all of that. These are beautiful and well articulated plans. Sir, when will this implementation start? And the engagement you talked about at local level, whom are you engaging? Is it the traditional rulers? Is it state governors? Some of whom have also made clear what they want in their states with respect to banning of open grazing. So how will this come to be? Because we want to see a proper implementation of this very beautiful articulation of ideas aimed at transforming the livestock sector.
Thank you very much. This is not to assume, for example, that many of these initiatives have not been ongoing. And also, if you look at the country at large, we can see that substantial progress has already been made in many states. We will all agree the intensity and scale of these conflicts have significantly reduced in many states, if you take, for example. And again, it also depends on the dynamism and the level of proactiveness of the states and local institutions, like I earlier said. If we take, for example, states like Adamawa, like Nasarawa, like Plateau, where some of these conflicts have been very endemic in the previous decade, you can see a significant de-escalation of conflicts in these states. And the reason is because those local institutions and the state's government have come together and have been working with the relevant stakeholders. Now, coming back to the point you make, some of the most important stakeholders at the local level whose participation will be enhanced by the proactiveness of the state governments are the traditional institutions, the religious leaders, and often the community-based institutions. The community-based organizations, the social groupings, the women organizations, the peace-building networks, and of course many of our international peace-building organizations that have been working in many of these areas. So what we are doing now is to prompt up all of this and come back with a collaborative framework of working together to enhance the successes that we have achieved in many of these states, and then to scale it up to those states where we are having some of the current challenges. Again, I have to make it very categorically clear here that many of the conflicts, many of the issues today we are ascribing as farmer-herder conflicts are actually other forms of crisis, particularly the growing insecurity. And one of the things that has happened in the recent years, again, often driven by political considerations, is the ethnicization of some of these conflicts, which we have repeatedly said is very dangerous. Crime, once you assign or once you associate criminal activities with either ethnicity, socio-economic activities, or religion, you will end up fighting those religions or those identities while allowing the crime to boomerang. Organized crime always involves very delicate networks that only detailed and careful security analysis will be able to unravel the actors. For example, you can have, those that carry out the arms out there in the field, but there are many other actors that drives these criminal syndicates. So the more we allow our security institutions, the more we cooperate, the more we take these challenges as national challenges, and the less we emphasize some of these divisive narratives, the better we are able to manage some of these crises. So some of these issues we ascribe as farmer-herder conflicts are actually issues that are beyond just farmers and pastoralists. They are issues that are related to the challenges of security in this country. So
all right.
Our challenge now
Dr.
is to try...
Dr. Momale, let's pause you in the meantime, because we have the other guests. We'll return to you in the course of the conversation. Let's bring in Professor Hamisu Shaributu, who is at our Enugu Network Center. Professor Shaributu, you listened to the technical advisor to the Honorable Minister of Agriculture and Rural Development, and what is the new game plan. What are your thoughts on the issues that he has outlined? Is it a case of old wine in new skin, or is fresh wine in fresh skin?
Well, thank you very much. I think this time around is the energization of the old wine in the old skin, trying as much as possible to see how we will put life into the long-standing solutions that has been proposed. But first of all, let me say this, that we need to understand some things. Just like he mentioned, there's the issue of farmer-herders clash, and there's the issue of criminality that has crept into this concept. That is one. The second thing there is the issue of grazing reserve and the issue of forest reserves. These are, again, two different things under two different institutions. While the grazing reserve concept is under the Ministry of Agriculture and Rural Development, the issue of forest reserve is under the confines of the Federal Ministry of Environment. Now, when you talk about sensitization, there must be a time frame to sensitize the stakeholders. And Nigeria is replete with this experience. Let us take, for example, when the NYSC program was being proposed by the Gowon regime, everybody knows the level of resistance that has been met. Now, just recently, the coronavirus situation is that many people did not even believe that this thing comes. Now, for those of us that are in extension, we know that there is a pyramid of adoption, that is pyramid of understanding. And the pyramid starts with innovators and it ends with laggards. But the Nigerian situation is such that there are those we label impossible or antagonists. Now, this is a different bar altogether created. Now, what do I mean by that? You cannot continue to remain in a stagnant position trying to convince stakeholders year in, year out. This situation did not start today. We started as far back as 1964. And every time we come up and say we want to sensitize stakeholders first, it is good to sensitize stakeholders, but it is also good to tell stakeholders that this is the time to take action. We have spent a lot of time trying to convince the pastoralists there's a need for them to settle. And up to now, we have not succeeded. Now, the delay in getting them convinced has now introduced another dimension where there is resistance on the part of other non-pastorally tribes. And of course, some government officials now coming in. So I want to say that the step that is being taken now with the endorsement of Mr. President is the right place to go. Because, and let us have a time frame within which this program will be implemented. I think the key thing there is for us to have a time frame. And you see, we learn from reciprocal colleagues. A state government that initiates an action, is an innovator. But there are other people that the early majority that will actually come into it and begin to see the benefit of what is happening in another state and key into it. But if we continue to run in circle, just like Kingsley was saying in his introduction, we continue to move in cycle, I can tell you that we are not going anywhere. We are so happy within the agricultural sector, very, very happy, because it is now time for action. And I think that there is a need for us to plead with other stakeholders like the governors, like the local government chairmen, to begin to key into this beautiful program. I think this is where we have to start. Enough of rigmaroling, proposing and counter-proposing, setting up of committees upon committees, begging, sensitization. I think there is a need for us to start, just like Mr. President has shown his willingness. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much, sir. One point I would like to take home here is the fact that he's talked about to convince the pastoralists to understand that the game has to change. That's a very key point, because with all these beautiful plans, if the pastoralists are not in agreement with you, are not prepared to, of course, adhere to what has been laid down, then all the efforts would have been in vain. Right, so thank you indeed. Let's go to Professor Gideon Emelue, Department of Forest Resources and Wildlife Management, Faculty of Agriculture, University of Science, University of Benin. So you've listened to Dr. Omale and, of course, the last speaker. But I want you to make reference to what Dr. Omale laid out as the master plan being put in place by the Ministry of Agriculture and, of course, the presidency to address this very perennial issue in this country. What are your views?
Thank you, Nigerians. I've listened keenly to all the issues that are being canvassed. I want to say that we have been hearing this for a very long time. And as we have been hearing it, it seems as if there is much talk, no action. And the people in the field, the farmers, other users of land use, they have been passing through a lot. I think whatever thing anybody is saying, whether the state government, whether the president, they don't seem to be new. The greatest issue is how to take off. How do we solve the problem? We are talking about time frame, when to do this, when to start the ranching and all that. Somebody is bearing the brunt in the state at the community level. How do we ensure? Are we keeping that static? So we should remember that in agriculture, we have livestock, we have arable farms, we have forests and the likes. And what is going on, this issue has been on for a long time. We cannot continue to do one thing continuously. I remember I'm from an agrarian area. We used to have cows, native cows. It got up to a stage, the native cows were dealing with the crops behind the farm, at the middle, at the far farm. And the communities, they took decision in Delta State that all the cows should go, they should be banned. And that is what they are keeping till today. And unfortunately, we have now discovered that the other cows now come in to replace the native cows. It didn't take long for that ban to take place, and every other person had to adjust. So I think from my own view, in Nigeria, the dominant vegetation we have is the rainforest, the savanna area largely, and we have states that are associated with rearing of cows, rearing of rams, rearing of all the likes. And so, for me, the first thing to do is a ban. When there is an action, when there is action that is adverse, the first thing you do is to take an action to stop that from going on. For years, we have been talking about this. We have been talking about this. We've been talking about cattle routes. We've been talking about grazing reserve. They don't seem to be very realistic any longer. So there is need to back up what the certain state governors have done. That's the most practical step that will help to make sure that at least, let us see where we go from there. If we are going to, for me, I tip ranching. Ranching seems to be the best for now. There are countries like Botswana, South Africa, Mozambique, Ethiopia. I don't know how long it took them before they took practical steps. So my thought is that this is the time to start because the conflict is getting much. Ordinarily, we know that taking cows from one place to the other, an open grazing style, it doesn't work. What are you actually looking for? You are looking for food, you are looking for water. Can this thing be provided around? It's possible. When you say you want to engage those who carry the cows with the communities, and who actually are you dealing with? Are you dealing with a driver or you are dealing with the owner of the motor? Who are you dealing with? Who are the owners of the cows? Up till now, we don't know. If there is an accident and some people die, we should expect that the owner of the motor should be talking about compensation. But in this case, the farmers have been at the losing end, and nobody is coming out. Is it the federal government that is paying them? Is it the state government that is paying them? So the issue of security, in fact, as of now, the thing is aggravating more and more. Because even the cow rearers themselves, they are meeting up with issues and problems they have never expected. They have the issue of rustling, and they need people to walk along with them to guide them. I see, so there is conflict of interest, and there is need for us to begin to implement. This issue of moratorium, I don't seem to buy it at all, because we have places in Nigeria where the grass is abundant. Let them start from that side. Leave the southern side where they are used to growing crops and all that. Thank you so much for now.
Professor Gideon Emelue, thank you very much for your opening comments. I'm sure Dr. Momale, of course, will reply to some of the things that you have said. But while Professor Shaributu was speaking, he touched on a very important point, and I would like you to speak to this. He says, look, there is the issue of grazing reserves. There is also the issue of forest reserves. I was reading some of the statements that have been issued recently with regard to the new game plan by the federal government to terminate the farmers-herders clashes. And one point, I don't know whether it was a nomenclatural, misapplication, but they said they were going to revive. They were going to revive forest reserves. I would like you to speak to this so that we know what is the difference between grazing reserves and forest reserves. I have some experience with the forest. I don't know how you can revive those ones in a number of a few years. Tell us, Prof.
Thank you. When you talk about forest reserve, we are talking about area that is reserved, delineated, gazetted for the purpose of either for timber products or for taking care of area where we have rivers and all that. But the main thing is that it's for forest production. There is the major issue at stake is to produce goods and services that are associated with the forest. That's what a forest reserve is. Strictly, forest reserve is under the purview of the state government. We do not have federal forest reserve, and we can never have that because of the federal system of government. The state governors are the ones that take care of the forest. So the forest is more or less like a reservoir a reservoir where the products and services associated with the forest reserve are perpetuated or managed. Now, when we talk about grazing reserve is an area that is strictly reserved to take care of grazers, that is animals like cows and the rest. I think what the president may be talking about is that early stage where they had a grazing reserve. They had something like that so many years ago. They had cattle routes many, many years ago. Unfortunately, if I can still go back to history, from research, most of those grazing reserves were never used at all. I don't believe that the grazing reserve they're talking about is national park, because the national park is another entity again that where the wild animals are managed, where they are conserved for the services and products. I don't believe that is what they are trying to say. But I want to state from the onset that whichever way you want to look at it, the grazing reserve is still the state. You still have to carry the state along for you to be reviving any grazing reserve. Most of those reserves are nowhere. You've just heard about them. Most of them have been overtaken by population, by maybe airports and the rest. That is where we are.
Thank you. Back to the studio here, Dr. Momale. I know you would like to respond to some of the issues that they raised, but in addition to that, I would like you also to let us know the mechanism for the actualization of the collaborative framework you earlier talked about. You know, this time around we're talking about implementation of whatever policy that has been articulated between the Ministry of Agriculture and, of course, the presidency, because as we have all been told that this is the time to address this issue head on.
Okay, thank you very much. Maybe I'll just start from just the last comment with respect to the revitalization of the grazing reserves and the forest reserves that was mentioned. Forest reserves, everybody knows, they are enclosures or areas that, like he said, protected by law, where certain things are restricted. For example, every one of us knows that the rules of a forest reserve is that no cutting of trees, no hunting of animals, no burning of bush, no farming, no grazing. These are simple rules, and the purpose is nature conservation. And like he said, apart from forest reserves that conserve trees, vegetation, and the natural ecology and protects our wildlife, we also have our national parks, which are very more extensive areas also for the same purpose. Now, restricted use of forest is allowed in the forest reserves, not for commercial purpose, but maybe like a collection of wild fruits and things like that within the community norms. And the practice varies a little from one part of the country to another. In parts of northern Nigeria, for example, you even have community forest reserves, whereby local governments, communities can keep a particular area and protect it as a forest reserve. So the purpose for which Mr. President is interested in the revitalization of forest reserve is that they are critical in the management of our natural resources. They are critical in the restoration of our ecologies, and they are critical to the preservation of the agricultural resources of the country. So for us to conserve, maintain our agricultural resources, and ensure balance, we need not only focus on grazing reserves, but also on the forest reserves. This is for our national benefit. So it's not just about an issue for cattle or for conflicts, but also for the conservation and preservation of our critical national assets. And this is what we consider very important, and we do believe that we are going to work with the state governments, the Federal Ministry of Environment, to see which kind of support mechanisms can be devolved and supported to the states to ensure the preservation and restoration of many of our degraded forest reserves that have been neglected over these years. They are very critical, like I said, in preservation of our natural water sources, in the conservation of our soils, in the conservation of our biotic and abiotic resources. And this will, in the long run, enhance not only crop productivity, but also livestock productivity. And so this is what we are looking at. And there are many approaches and models of community-based forest management systems which will be deployed for that purpose. Coming back to the grazing reserves, again, This will be the central focus for the transformation of the livestock production system, for the development of infrastructure, and, like Professor Sharabutu said, moving away from the rhetorics to the practice, where we will bring in particularly the large herd owners, particularly those that are involved in mobility or migration from one place to another, provide them with the necessary requisite infrastructure, capacity and skills, and ramp up private sector participation in some of those areas to bring these people practically on ground, to begin to develop them and give them the capacity to first of all transform the production system, to begin to grow pasture, to begin to invest in provision of livestock for their own, water for their own livestock, and ultimately lead to the establishment of ranches. Again, I agree that the time frame is very important, and there is nothing that you can do without getting people's buy-in, without getting the buy-in of the local institutions, away from the rhetorics into practical actions. And this is why we are going to commence it immediately. We are going to start working with the state governments, our community institutions, and our local governments together, particularly in these areas where these grazing reserves exist and where the state governments are willing to participate and support these initiatives. The other challenges that have been mentioned, like Professor was saying, like I said, it's a matter of approach, it's a matter of understanding, it's a matter of perception as well. But the critical thing is that livestock, wherever they exist, are resources of those states. The livestock today in either the states of, for example, Rivers or Sokoto or Kebbi or Ogun, they are the resources of that particular state. The more the state harness those resources, develop those...
How do you mean? How do you mean?
Yes.
What ownership theory is that?
What I mean is that whatever exists within your territory are resources that are owned by that particular territory. If you develop those resources, harness those resources, is for the collective good of that particular territory. That is basic. That is basic. For example, even if it is, for example, foreign investor that has come to Nigeria to invest resources, those resources are still for the benefit of Nigeria. So the more Nigerians are able to harness and benefit from those resources, the better. And this is the principle for which we are going to promote, to see how do we make each of these sections of the Nigerian society recognize that those resources that exist within their territories, if they are harnessed, they are for the better benefit of those particular territories. I give you an example. I give you an example.
I'm not pushing you, but I want to just amplify, for you to amplify what you're saying. Now, you say that, for instance, in states, are you now saying, because I asked you about the mechanism for the actualization of the collaborative framework, are you going to involve states in establishing ranches in states of Nigeria, both in the north and southern part of Nigeria?
First of all, there is no intervention, there is no action that will be taken in any part of Nigeria without the participation of two critical stakeholders. I have earlier said that, the state governments and the local institutions. That has already been made very clear, and that is the framework we are going to adopt. The state governments and the institutions that exist where those particular resources are. For example, what I'm saying is, for example, if we go to Sokoto State, or if we go to Adamawa State, and there is a grazing reserve in a particular local government, and the first entry point is the state governments. Those grazing reserves are the property of the states. So if the state government said, yes, we are willing to develop X grazing reserve, then the next stage is the local institutions where those grazing reserves exist. What framework are we going to capitalize? We are going to make an assessment of that particular grazing reserve. What are the potentials? What are the resources? Who are the current users? Going into the details, for example. What are the existing potentials for development? And who are the stakeholders that will participate in that particular approach and in that particular intervention? This will be worked out with the local institutions, up with the state government. The role of the federal government is to become the catalyst, to support and promote private sector investments in extension service delivery, in For example, investment in beef and dairy production, in commercial pasture production, and possibly support in terms of infrastructure. That's the best the federal government can do.
Okay, Dr. Momale, thank you very much. Again, we still have some time, so we'll return to it. I was just curious about the ownership theory we're propounding.
Okay.
When you say livestock or it belongs to the state, I mean, that's a bit slightly challenging.
Okay,
it's slightly challenging. I'll tell you, from a legal point of view, when you're talking about property law, for instance, it is said, there's a maxim for it, quid plantator solo sed it. What is attached to the land belongs to the land. But if you have movables, such as livestock, I mean, if they decide to move their livestock from rivers into Edo State, it's no longer the property of rivers. Yeah. It becomes the property of Edo State. So you move it from Edo State, you take it to Kogi, it becomes property of Kogi. So I mean, you have that kind of thing, but that's not really a substantive point. One issue that I would like Professor Shaributu to also speak about. Professor Hamisu Shaributu, well, all of these plans that have been outlined and for which you are calling for action, and indeed Professor Emelwe as well, tell us, do we have a sense of numbers? Namely, how many livestock are we planning for? And for what period of time? For instance, I mean, if I were to ask, what is the population of cattle in Nigeria? What is the population of sheep in Nigeria? What is the population of goats in Nigeria, or donkeys, or camels? Do we have a sense of this? That's one. And then two, for whom are we planning? Because there is the ECOWAS protocol on transhumans, that's to say movement of human beings and livestock across the West African sub-region. The plans that have been outlined now so that we can more effectively deliver it once implementation starts. Do we know the population of the animals we're talking about? Do we know the population of human beings that are supposed to be engaged in the husbandry of this livestock?
Yeah, thank you very much, sir. Before I get to this very, very serious and concerning question that you have raised, let me say that there is a lot of misinformation out there. And this misinformation is responsible for this quick action that some of us are taking. Now, I thank Momale for explaining this issue of forest reserve. But the forest reserve, the way my colleague is seeing it, is not actually it. If you look at where criminality takes place, you find out that they are associated with these densely populated forest areas. And that is the plan of the federal government. Criminals actually find their hidings in the forest areas. And because the forests are not manned security-wise, they now become available for criminals to stay there without being monitored. Anybody who is kidnapped in this country is taken to the forest. And I dare say that virtually nobody knows the terrain in that place. So one of the measures that will be taken is to try and see how the forest can actually be owned by the government. But for now, the forest is virtually owned by criminals, and that is where they stay. So part of the action is to ensure that the agro rangers are well trained in order for them to be able to take charge of the forest. And I'm telling you that it is not an easy means, because geographical information system will be there. They have to do a mapping of that area. They have to understand the terrain, the movement. The rivers that are there must be understood, so that anything that happens can easily be traced and actually nipped at the bud. Then the forest reserve issue. There's a misinformation about forest reserve, the forest reserve we have in this country. We have 415 identified. We have about 112 or 17, according to records, that have been developed so far. And people, pastoralist families, are staying there. Momale is one of the beneficiaries of the grazing reserve in Kachia area. The Wawazenge in Bauchi, it leads up to the Wase. We have Bobi, we have Lata. All these grazing reserves have people there. The only thing we are complaining about there is that we have not been able to step up on the provisions that, the infrastructure that are supposed to be there. Now, these lack of concentration and developing the grazing reserves is what is pushing people. It's a push factor to push the pastoralists out of that place because they cannot stay without water and rest. So let us run away from the fact that these grazing reserves are not there. They are there, they are being utilized. And there are pastoralist families staying there. Now, coming to your question, which is very, very serious, we have a good statistics of the number of livestock that we have. We have about 20 million cattle. We have about 40 million sheep and goat. And we have other livestock. Now, the livestock transformation agenda is not just supposed to concentrate on cattle. Right now, as we are talking to you, there are state governments that have already initiated action to try and see what they can do. I can mention Niger State, that they have gone far in engaging private sector, international donor organizations, and they are working seriously on it. I know the case of Plateau State that have taken their own statistics. They are ready to get into it. Nasarawa have come up, and a lot of other states, like have been mentioned by Momale. So these statistics is none. Now, what are we targeting? We cannot target 20 million cattle at the same time. It is not possible. And that is the more reason why there is no need to rush into an action of categorically using the word ban. We can talk about encouraging zero grazing. When we encourage zero grazing, and that is, we need a census of the Fulani population or the pastoralist population that are resident in each of the states of the Federation. Like, for example, if you go to Ishain area in Oyo, let me tell you, it will be very, very difficult for anybody to come and say, Fulani people staying in Ishain, pack your things and go out. It will be very difficult to say, Lata Grazing Reserve, all the Fulani people, pack your things and go out. It is going to be very, very impossible. So what do? We are expected to understand the transformation concept and then domesticate them according to need. Like, for example, nothing stops the governor of Enugu State from understanding, what livestock provision are. Remember that there is no state in this country that does not have a Ministry of Agriculture and Rural Development. There is no state that does not have a Department of Livestock. There are several livestock professionals in this state. I think that what we need to do is to be a bit technical about some of these things. Get whatever concept the federal government is talking about, get the policy of the federal government, call our technical people that are collecting salaries, they are there in the ministry, and ask them to look at this concept and try to see what they can do to domesticate. Because what we are saying there is, if we say ban this, it's going to be a problem. Like, for example, in the Middle Belt area, we are not talking about piggery. Of course, pig is livestock. We should be able to encourage pig production. We should be able to encourage sheep and goat production wherever they are predominant. So the whole policy is meant in such a way that every state government should be able to look at what they can do within the concept and try to see what they can encourage. Because, let me say this, let us not just identify cattle rearing to the Fulani people. Yes, predominantly they are, just like other traits. But I want to say this, that there is no law in this country that has stopped a typical plateau man from rearing livestock. And of course they are. There is nothing that stops an Igbo man from rearing livestock. Nothing stops a Yoruba person from rearing livestock. So let us not look at livestock production as the preclusive preserve of the Fulani people, or what I can call the non-pastoral and nomadic tribes. Let us try and see what we can do. But more so, I went to Gaiki in Enugu, and I was able to see the number of Igbo people that are participating in trade in cattle. Go to Port Harcourt, you see so many Ikwere people, so many Ijo people that are participating in livestock trade. So there is a chain. There's a chain of productivity. There's a chain of engagement. There is employment provision in that area. And I think this is what the Honorable Minister is trying to see, that let us not abandon ₦1 trillion investment, ₦1 trillion resources, just because we think that there is a problem. The problem must be solved, and this problem, like I said, must be solved by way of, coming together and trying to see whether we can understand what is happening in order to move forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Prof. Well stated, really, because the abandonment of that sector of our national life will be suicidal, if you ask me. And of course, what you have just propounded actually should be properly studied or analyzed by state governors and other stakeholders for us to make to break even in that sector. I think the question Kinsley actually asked that had to do with the statistics of the cattle that we have in Nigeria is pertinent, because of the ECOWAS protocol, we have other areas coming from other parts of the region into Nigeria. From Mali, from Cameroon, from other parts of the region coming into Nigeria. And I don't know whether we have taken that into account, because of course if we are planning to have ranches or the modern way of cattle rearing, whether those people are considered. These are some of the issues we're going to also talk when we return from this break. Let's take a short break. You're watching Good Morning Nigeria on the network service of the NTA. When we come back, the conversation continues. Don't go away. All right, we're back again. You're still watching Good Morning Nigeria, and we have a very important topic this morning. And of course, we also have guests who are addressing the issue, like Dr. Momale here, who is key to this conversation, having come from the Ministry of Agriculture. A short while ago, Kinsley asked a question that has to do with the issue of statistics of the cattle we have in Nigeria. Because as we are planning to, of course, internationalize the business of cattle rearing in Nigeria, we also have to consider the numbers. And again, because of the ECOWAS protocol that we're all adhering to, we have infiltrators, or if we call it those who have the freedom of movement, as we have it in the protocol, who are also cattle rearers coming from different parts of the region in Nigeria. Some of them are wielding AK-47 with them, which is unusual here in Nigeria. The locals that we know that are cattle rearers don't usually carry AK-47, but we're beginning to see them. Now, with this plan that the presidency and for the ministry, this plan that is in focus at the moment, are you considering such individuals or group of cattle rearers coming from outside Nigeria? What is their place? Are you also carrying along members of Mietiala in this plan?
Okay, thank you very much. I think it's a very valid and important issue that has to do with the regional dimensions and some of the regional protocols and agreements to which Nigeria is a party. I think one of the key things that has been misunderstood, again in Nigeria, is the transhumance protocol. First of all, it needs to be understood that cross-border movement of livestock within the entire countries of the West Africa region is a traditional practice that was ongoing for a very long time. Even before colonialism, these borders were not existing. But with the creation of these nation states, post-colonialism, these borders were established and livestock were still moving across these borders. And the purpose of the ECOWAS transhumance protocol is actually not to allow free movement of animals as is being thought about in many quarters in Nigeria. The purpose is actually to regulate and coordinate, provide a framework for coordinating and regulating the movement of livestock. Prior to the protocol, I can just come with my animals from anywhere, come to Nigeria and move out of Nigeria. But with the protocol, a system was provided. The first system says that for me to bring my livestock from any other country into Nigeria, first of all, I must present my particulars, indicating I am a citizen of a particular country. I must present a certificate of the health of my livestock, which will contain the total number of animals that I own and a certification from a veterinary professional from the originating country that my animals are of good health. And then third, in that certificate, I must state where I am going into in the country in which I'm entering and for how long am I going to stay in that particular areas. So you see, all the requirements needed to track and monitor the person entering into the country are provided for. So the ECOWAS Transhuman Protocol is an excellent institutional framework for controlling and regulating the cross-border movement of livestock across
what is
the
practical
countries.
experience?
The
Such as
issue,
we have on
the
the
challenge,
movement.
therefore, is that what is the level of implementation of this protocol is where the challenge comes. And this is what allow unregulated entry and exit of livestock across these borders. So contrary to our view that is the ECOWAS Transhuman Protocol that allows this, it is the non-implementation and non-enforcement of this protocol that has created this challenge.
In Nigeria?
In Nigeria and also in many other countries across West Africa.
So what should be our national reaction?
Presently, you could see that in terms of cross-border movement, there has been a lot of changes. And there has also, like you rightly said, new variants to some of these challenges. First of all, the insurgency in the northeast has blocked a substantial point of entry of livestock from Cameroon, the Republic of Chad, and the Difa province of Niger into Nigeria, because all of those areas are governed by insurgents, and therefore there is reduced in entry of pastoralists. So what we have, the greatest is between the borders in Ogun, Oyo, and Kwara, between the Republic of Benin and Nigeria, and then the states of Kebbi, Sokoto, Zamfara, and Katsina, with pastoralists mostly from Niger Republic into Nigeria. So what we need to do is to engage with authorities, and that's what we are going to do with authorities, particularly in the Republic of Niger, as well as Benin Republic. Two, first of all, ensure the enforcement of the provisions of the ECOWAS Transhuman Certificate. Once that protocol has been enforced, then you will be able to monitor who are the pastoralists that will come in, where they are going, and for how long they are going to stay, and therefore you'll be able to regulate what happens. To do that in Nigeria, that is why we are saying that the local institutions are very important, because patrolling the borders across these regions is beyond the capacity of the Nigerian Immigration Service, considering the thousands of kilometers that these borders crisscross. But where you have the institutions, community institutions, and you strengthen the leadership of the pastoral communities along the borders and the traditional rulers, they will be able to work with the Nigerian Immigration Services, the Nigerian Customs Services, and the Nigerian Police to regulate and coordinate movement across these borders. And once we move ahead in the implementation of this, we will regulate and provide conditions for the movement of livestock across these borders in the interim, while also working with these states also to work out mechanisms by which we can exploit positively for the benefit of Nigeria the entry of any animals into our country.
Okay, thank you very much, Dr. Momale. My colleague Kirian and I, we've taken it on different aspects of various relevant ECOWAS protocols, the one of free movement, for instance, and law enforcement, the issue of the proliferation of small arms and light weapons, and the major challenge that law enforcement officers in Nigeria are having, whereas Nigeria tries to take the lead in this. There's very little cooperation coming from elsewhere on the West African coast. So this is part of why we have raised this issue of the full management of the protocol on transhumans. One point, I'm tempted to return to Professor Hamisu Shaributu before I go back to Professor Gideon Emilwe in Benin. Professor Shaributu, well, some persons have made the observation that is it necessarily the case that we're going to have livestock production in all the 36 states of the Federation and the Federal Capital Territory? That the point is always, usually in economics, the law of comparative advantage. In which states do you have the most opportunity for a particular industry or a particular subsector to thrive. I mean, when we did geography in our elementary school days, if you drew a map of Nigeria, you will see rice and skin, you know, in the northern part of the country, groundnut in the northern part of the country, timber, palm oil, cocoa in the southern parts, you know, and so on and so forth. Is it that we are striving now to, you know, get all the states to be into livestock production? That's one question. Second question, also related to the issue of comparative advantage, because Dr. Momale raises a very critical point to say, look, you're going to get investors into the production of feeds and so on and so forth. Is it not possible for, say, look, on account of space, you have the animals in some part of the country or some parts of the country where they have the space, and then another area will just be the one, say, producing the feeds. When you produce the feeds, you put them on trains to go and feed the animals, or you put them in trucks to go and feed the animals. Must it be that the feeds should be produced in situ where the animals are also located? I'm not quite clear about these points.
Thank you very much. Let me take us back to the agricultural transformation agenda under the Jonathan administration. I think specifically when Dr. Adeshina was the Minister of Agriculture and Rural Development. You will recall at that time, he followed the same pattern of geopolitical zones and decided to introduce this concept of comparative advantage. But if you look at that map, eventually, virtually every geopolitical zone indicated they can rear livestock. And this thing happened this time around when the National Livestock Transformation Agenda came into being. The moment money was mentioned, practically every person wanted to key in. As at the last time, records from the Department of Husbandry in the Federal Ministry of Agriculture indicated that 22 different states showed interest in livestock development. So you will find out that it depends on the disposition. Immediately the government comes out to say we have money to do this, everybody rushes into it. The same thing happened with rice production. Virtually every state is saying we can grow rice. If you talk about palm oil, every place will say, well, the target is actually what money is going to come from the federal government, the federal post. So this is what is making it very, very difficult for us to actually compartmentalize areas of production. I'm just citing this as an example for people to know how complex our nation is. The moment you say you want to do afforestation, the person from the north will say, yes, afforestation is good for us. The person from the south, because of the financial aspect, will say we want it. The same thing with erosion. When you want to introduce measures to curb erosion in the southeast, the person from the north will also come up and say, no, we also want it, because we look at everything as if it's a national thing. This time around, we have to be very, very realistic about it. And let me say this. Dr. Adeshina had actually proposed this concept of let us produce livestock over there. We must not trade this livestock to Lagos. The person in Lagos or in Enugu is more interested in the meat than seeing livestock live. And if he has the facility that the livestock feeds, if he has the facility to produce the feed and export it over there, he can actually do it. But our flair for saying let us share from the national cake is what is truncating the whole of this concept. There is nothing wrong with actually producing the livestock where they are. We have, and we know that there are some governors that actually propose, why don't you rear this livestock in Sambisa forest? Are we ready to do it? Are we ready to actually invest? And I know I have appeared in several fora to say that, look, let us look at our budget. Let us analyze on state-by-state basis. What are the actual investment or the capital proposal for even agriculture in general in all the states of the Federation? And try to see, you will find out that we are just playing pranks. We are just joking over this thing. There is nothing statistically wrong, nothing strategically wrong with having these ranches established in the north and then having them. But that is in a situation where you are looking at the animal resources from the perspective of cattle. What do you talk about pigs? What do you talk about rabbits? What do you talk about grass cutter? What do you talk about chicken, for example? These are all things that are supposed to be embedded in it. So within the grazing reserve, The provision is for veterinary service, for marketing, for transportation, for livestock service centers, for veterinary clinics, and then for pasture development. Further development is key to the issue of livestock production. But if, for example, the southern part, especially areas like Ebonyi and the northern part of Enugu State, if they can produce feed, they have a good place to provide job for people, and then we can easily take, some of these feed out. Like, for example, again, if you get to 9th Mile, there's this brewery there. Some of the feeds that are actually being fed to the livestock actually come from what we call brewers' spent grain. That is the aftermath of processing of wheat, which is what is here. The breweries do not utilize wheat that is produced in Enugu. No, they utilize wheat that is being produced from the northern part of this country. So this is a concept that we will all study. The most important thing is let us have the technical people, technologies of development, the animal scientists that are there in various states. Let the governors call them. Let them sit down and propose a solution so that it will go through the various houses of assembly and let us adopt it. I think this is where we're supposed to go.
All right, thank you very much indeed, Kingsley. If government is rolling out some money,
are you thanking me?
No. I'm feeling that we should engage in ranching as well. Because from what he has said, when money is available, everybody wants to do the same. We engage in some kind of business. We can engage in ranching on a serious
No. Just a subset of it. If it is feed production or logistics.
Okay,
I'm sure Dr. Momale will take another aspect of it and then do.
Okay, Professor Gideon Emelue, please, for want of time, we will not ask you any fresh question, but I would like you to react to some of the issues that have been raised by Dr. Momale with respect to the issue of protocol, ECOWAS protocol, and of course what we've heard from Secretary General of Agricultural Research Council of Nigeria.
Nigerians, I think we have all agreed that there is need to do things differently with this livestock, the cow rearing, and the rest. My belief is that the ranching of cows or ranching of other types of livestock will help to assuage what is going on now, because I try to listen very well about statistics. And I don't know who takes care of the cows moving from one state to the other. I didn't hear anything about it. Cows moving from Nasarawa to Benue, who knows the statistics? The one going to Oyo State, who knows the statistics? And that's where the problem is. So why trying to get to the direction of ranching, wholesale ranching? Who bears the brunt of all these issues, these conflicts? Who bears it? I've been asking this question. Is it the driver of the motor or is it the owner of the motor? Nobody has been talking about who owns cows up till now. And it perturbs me. We have been talking about, I told you before that the forest reserve is owned by state. The national parks are owned by the federal government. And the grazing reserve, of course, is still under the state, grazing. And so we should, why trying to start this war? Because if we say, let us start now, if there is nothing to fall back to, there is tendency to believe that, the certain state governments, governors have arbitrarily acted. They have acted well because they need to stop an action or else it will snowball into some other things. I want to make an appeal that those who are involved, let them walk the talk. It's not just to talk. If you talk about forest reserve in the south, turning it to become a grazing reserve, it's not as easy as you are looking at it. In fact, all over the world, all over Africa, the forest is innocently looking the way they are looking. You have to utilize where you are supposed to utilize. It's not a mode that you must put machine guns in all the forest reserve. We should all agree that this is the way we want to work. This is the way, this is our boundary. Nobody is saying pack away from your state if you want to raise a cow. What they are talking about is that ranching is the modern method. Those who have this investment should also invest. They should put something into it. Because we have been talking. those who are doing poultry, you go and build your poultry house, you stock it, and you manage it. Why is it that we are not talking to somebody who wants to have a cow? You don't want to invest anything. Just move from one place and use my farm to feed your cow. At the end, when you sell your cow, you are not going to, I don't have any share. So I think the earlier we walk the talk, the better. Thank you.
Well, Professor Gideon Emelue of the Department of Forest Resources and Wildlife Management at the University of Benin, at Benin City, would like to thank you for your contribution to our discussion today. You joined us from our Benin Network studios. We also would like to appreciate the Executive Secretary of the Agricultural Research Council of Nigeria, Professor Hamisu Shaributu from Enugu. You joined us. Thanks a lot for being always available on Good Morning Nigeria. And the technical advisor to the Honorable Minister of Agriculture and Rural Development, Dr. Saleh Momale, we thank you for being with us. There's an issue that is on the table. I had raised it in one of our earlier conversations. Professor Emelue has amplified it now. Who are the owners of the cattle, and what is their responsibility in ensuring that all of these plans and programs come to fruition so that the friction that we're having at the moment gets attenuated? I'm sure that that's an issue we'll focus on some other time, Kyria.
Exactly. And that's Good Morning Nigeria for today. We thank you for joining us. Please return again tomorrow when we'll be back with a fresh edition of the morning show. My name is Kyria Namayo. Have a great day.
And I'm Kingsley Osalula. To take care of yourself.